So let's move on to our next speaker. And this is really where our day all began. We really wanted to invite Staci up here to speak with patients. She's someone where it's not necessarily immediately obvious how her work in the field of exercise physiology could be helping to break new ground and generate new understanding and respect for the disease of myalgic encephalomyelitis. She's a recognized expert in the science of post-exertional malaise, or neuroimmune exhaustion, as it's called, or crashing, as we affectionately call it. She's the founder and program director of the Workwell Foundation. She started her career as an exercise physiologist doing strength and conditioning training with elite athletes and firefighters, and that sounds kind of interesting. Her work has contributed to the international consensus criteria for ME. She is vice president of the International Association for CFS-ME and co-author of the IACFS Physician Primer. Please welcome Staci Stevens.
Okay, the magic buttons. How is a girl supposed to follow the Pope?
You're the
So
queen.
wrong. It's so wrong.
There's your button right there.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. I've got to tell you, for the first time, this is only my second time up here to Vancouver, and so I got to do some touristy things yesterday. And the thing that stuck out the most amazing thing you have in this incredible town is your hedges. I have never seen such beautifully manicured hedges. They're everywhere, and they're in the front yard. They're not like I have a little hedge right against my house, but these are magnificent. They're like 25 feet tall. The nicer the house, you got a stone hedge and then 50 feet of hedges. We don't even know what's behind the hedges. So I got to tell you, I'm going to go home and tell everybody the best thing about the trip. You would not believe the hedges up in Canada. They're phenomenal. I'm going to talk to you today about post-exertional malaise. So I guess I can be the crash queen. I'm the queen of studying the crash and how to do more with less. So I think in your syllabus it says less is more, and I almost like that title better. Think about it this way. First, now I want to say thank you to our whole team, who we couldn't do what we do with just me. So I have a team of professors from the University of the Pacific, Chris Snell, Mark Van Ness, and Todd Davenport. We do a lot of stupid things together. So we were sitting around at a conference, and this one happened to be in Ottawa. We're at a Japanese restaurant, and Chris pops a whole wad of wasabi into his mouth. And Mark and I look at each other like, is he doing this on purpose? Pretty soon his eyes are watering, and he's tearing up. He had no clue. He wasn't doing a stupid trick like we often do together. He accidentally popped a whole wad of wasabi in his mouth. And he didn't have any water. It was hysterical. We were laughing about it for weeks. But sometimes less is more. This is true with wasabi. But this is also true with ME. So let's talk about what is post-exertional malaise. And this is what 3 different definitions have said about it. The ME/CFS Canadian Consensus definition says that it's physical or mental exertion that often causes debilitating malaise or fatigue, generalized pain, deterioration of cognitive functions, holy moly, it goes on and on. Everything gets worse after activity. The international ME consensus criteria says post-exertional neuroimmune exhaustion is the hallmark feature. It's a cardinal feature that is a pathological inability to produce sufficient energy on demand, with prominent symptoms primarily in the neuroimmune regions. What in the world does that mean? So we're going to talk about what do these mean. And the IOM report came out and said it's a worsening of symptoms after physical, cognitive, or emotional effort. That's probably the easiest to understand. And you all as patients understand it quite well, so I don't need to tell you what it is. But I thought it'd be helpful to give you a picture. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So the feeling you get after you have run. This is post-exertional malaise. And it is what I recommend that you avoid in your day-to-day life. So what I want to talk about today are 4 areas, and I've reversed them. So normally I talk about the biological basis, so you understand physiologically what's going on, and then go into, what you can do to make it better. So I've changed that because I always have patients say, wait, I want something that can help me today, that can help me right now. So I've changed everything. So we're going to talk a little bit about breathing first. And something that you can do immediately is breathing, and as Dr. Peterson mentioned, energy conservation. These are things that are practical, they're easy, everybody can do them, and you will feel better. And then we'll talk about the biological basis for activity intolerance and post-exertional malaise, and then end with another helpful tool in heart rate monitoring. Breathing. Breathing is a fantastic thing. There are all sorts of benefits just from doing focused breathing. Helps facilitate recovery, relaxes you, oxygenates the tissue, stress reduction, strengthens the muscles, all kinds of great things. And everybody can breathe. So I highly recommend that you never stop breathing and that you really focus on this because it's important. What happens with most patients is they tend to breathe really shallowly in their upper chest. And a lot of patients will say, I have shortness of breath. And you'll see them and they're breathing like this, almost hyperventilating. They're breathing very shallowly instead of breathing deeply. And what abdominal or diaphragmatic breathing does is it increases the oxygen available as well as strengthening muscles. And Dr. Peterson talked about core. He's stealing all my stuff. The Pope can do it, but it's still not right. Diaphragmatic muscles, muscles of respiration, they're the muscles of your core. And so strengthening those core muscles will just make everything easier and more efficient. So breathing is something you have to do. You can't not do it. So you could, if you can strengthen the muscles, you do it with a lower energy cost. How do you do it? So let's all try. Put a hand on your chest and a hand on your stomach. And what you want to do is you want to move your belly. So when you breathe into your belly. In through your nose. Make that belly move. Out through your mouth. Oh, I'm getting so relaxed. In through your nose. Out through your mouth. How do you feel? Not bad? Now, what you can also do is put a Kleenex on your stomach and make sure that Kleenex box moves. And then you know you're doing it correctly. And it takes practice. If you're not used to breathing deeply, you really kind of have to think about it in order to do it. That's one technique. And there are a ton of breathing techniques that are equally fantastic. So I don't know that any are better or worse than the others. Try the ones that work for you. But here's a second one that I use. It's most often used in pulmonary disease. And it's called pursed-lipped breathing. So the 2 big ticket factors here relieve shortness of breath. So after an exercise test, if somebody can't catch their breath, or they just in general have shortness of breath, I'll recommend pursed-lipped breathing. It also causes and promotes general relaxation. So you're starting to get anxious, you've overdone it, you're short of breath. You just take a couple of minutes and do some pursed-lip breathing. It will really help you relax, calm the breathing down. But what it does is it improves your ability to move air, that ventilation. It releases the trapped air in the lungs. And again, it slows the breathing rate so you can relax. It keeps the airways open so you can work longer and decrease the work or the cost of breathing. So it's an efficiency issue. Lots of great benefits. So here's how you do it. You breathe in through your nose for 2 counts and out through your lips for 4 counts, but it's out through pursed lips. So let's try a couple of these. In through your nose, 2 seconds, out through pursed lips. In through your nose, out through pursed lips. Okay, did that make anybody feel worse? Okay, so this is what's awesome. I found something that everybody can do. And so what I'll often hear is, there's nothing for the severely ill, the housebound patients that can't get out. Well, you can do this lying down in bed, and it's an exercise, that nasty word, that is actually beneficial. Now, you don't want to overdo the breathing, right? You don't want to go and do this for like 3 hours or 20 minutes, right? Start really short, because you can overdo anything. And I've had patients do just that. Oh, the breathing just wiped me out. What in the world? How did you do that? Well, I thought I'd start with 20 minutes. Yogi dudes don't start with 20 minutes. It's too long. Start with 2 to 5 breaths. That's it. And then gradually build up. Okay, that's breathing. So that's a great tool that everybody can use. Healthy, with a chronic illness, breathing is beneficial. The other area is this whole idea of energy conservation, and I call it being smart. So learn to think differently about daily activities that you have to do. And this is typically the purview of occupational therapists. So if you have a good occupational therapist, you can talk to them. There are programs for many chronic illnesses. I've used one. This particular one was actually developed for patients with rheumatoid arthritis. Try that again. Rheumatoid arthritis, and then it was customized for fatigue. And it has these 4 units, and it has all these great tips in it. There's a unit on pacing, learning to take rest breaks. Paying attention to body position, just being aware that good body position saves energy, poor body position wastes energy. And so just by changing some basic things, it takes 25% less energy to sit down than it does to stand up. If you have a finite amount of energy available and you want to do more, if you choose not to stand up all the time, you can do more sitting down. Really practical tips. Joint protection, if you have joints that are painful or are bothering you, you can use assistive devices and splints to make those activities easier. And learning to balance activities, balancing light and heavy tasks throughout the day and throughout the week so that you can accomplish more. So it's all about doing more with less. And so energy conservation therapy is really a fantastic tool to do this. And I wish we had time to talk about, I could talk about this for a whole hour, but we have more to get to. Energy saving tips. Okay, I'm going to give you my top tips. Learn to say no. Don't just automatically say yes. When somebody wants you to do something, learn to say no. And also learn to say yes to help or assistance when you need it. Hugely effective. Prioritize what you most want to do. Don't give up the activities that you love to do. Just figure out how to do them. Balance rest with activity so that you can do what you want to do. Sit or lie down so that you have more energy to accomplish those goals. Shower smart. This is my number 1 tip. You go to a spa, they have a nice hotel, they have a nice terry cloth robe that you slip into after your shower. It dries you off. So take a shower sitting down. Get a shower chair or a shower stool. Save that 25% by just sitting down in the shower. Use a terry cloth robe to dry off. No one's watching you stand up in the shower. At least I really hope in Canada people don't watch you while you're showering, right? So sit down in the shower, use a terry cloth robe, and I've had patients tell me this is like the best tip they've ever had, and it's really effective. Pretend you're at a spa. Simplify your clothing and makeup choices. So the little sheep tells the puffy sheep, I warned you not to go in there. Don't go with a high maintenance haircut. Go with something that's quick and easy. Choose wrinkle-free clothing. Go with the easy options. Screen your calls. If somebody's calling, don't feel like you have to answer the phone every time it rings. Only talk when you're able to. Use the caller ID. If it's a call that you know you can't get off of for an hour and you don't want to take that call, save your energy. Do not pick up the phone. Seriously, don't. Use the power of blue. I don't know what it takes in Canada to get a handicap parking sticker, but if you're moderately to severely impaired, that space is for you. You can do more if you park close than if you have to park way, way, way far away in the parking lot. Parking is not easy in Vancouver, in this area. So if you can save some energy by parking close, use the power of blue. Pack your groceries strategically. Ideally, find a grocery store that delivers, but short of that, you can pack your items in separate bags. So your frozen items, you can pack in the little freezer insulated bag. Trader Joe's has awesome bags. So I don't know if you guys have Trader Joe's up here. So I think I heard you have Pirate Joe's. Yeah, Pirate Joe's. Right, so you have insulated bags and regular bags, and then just take that bag that you need to put in the fridge or the freezer, take it home. If you don't have the energy to put it away, put the whole bag in the fridge or in the freezer. And then you can sort it out later. Okay, so all of these tips are great, but if you don't identify your activity coping style, then when you start to go, oh, I really want to get into activity management and I want to make the most of my energy, if you don't know how you cope with your activities, then it's not very helpful. So you have to know who you are. And I'm going to help you with that. So on the one side of the spectrum, we have the person who says, I'm trying to be awesome today, but I'm exhausted from being so freaking awesome yesterday. That's your overdoer. And then we have your person who is an avoider of activity, a little bit in denial. So according to the artist, it's a circle with stress management issues. Clearly that's a square. That's not a circle. Okay, so two types of patients that I see. One is the roller coaster, and the other is the activity avoider. The roller coaster gets a little bit of energy, doesn't know when they're going to have energy again. They go absolutely crazy, and then they crash and burn. And they do this till they get a little bit of energy, and then they go crazy, and then they crash and burn. Except they never figure out how to get off the roller coaster, and so they're just going crazy and crashing and burning, and they keep going and going. Now, the activity avoider, they figured out that when they overdo activity, they're going to have post-exertional malaise, and they will crash and burn, so they stay on the couch, they stay in bed, and don't ever get out. So both of these are extremes, and you want your activity avoider to be able to engage in safe activities that don't cause flare-ups. And you also want your roller coaster to rein themselves in. So a little balance is good on both ends, kind of come into the center. What's common to both is that both cause extreme frustration because you're not able to do the activities you want to do when you want to do them. And so when I talk to patients and they tell me how great they're doing because they're practicing activity management, I want to know the truth. So I want to know what happens when I'm not there and what they're willing to tell me. So, because if no one saw it, right, it didn't happen. So denial is a powerful thing. And I just want to challenge you, instead of ignoring the consequences of your activity, to start tuning into them. What happens when you overdo it, and can you avoid that? So I want to move on now to how cardiopulmonary exercise testing informs the biological basis for activity intolerance. Okay, so remember, this is what you want to avoid in your day-to-day lives. According to the Institute of Medicine report that Dr. Peterson just talked about, they said the subjective reports of post-exertional malaise and prolonged recovery are supported by objective evidence in the scientific literature, including failure to normally reproduce exercise test results, the 2-day cardiopulmonary exercise test, and impaired cognitive function after exertion. There is sufficient evidence that post-exertional malaise is a primary feature that helps distinguish ME/CFS, SEED, or whatever we want to call it, from other conditions. And so that's really been the focus of our research. We've really focused on what is this thing called post-exertional malaise, what is the patient's experience of it, and then how do we measure it? In we come with an exercise test. And this is a cardiopulmonary exercise test is a stress test. It's a standardized stressor. It levels the playing field. It's used for a variety. It's used in exercise science. It's used in cardiology and pulmonology across the board. It's just a standardized test. And there are position statements from the American Heart Association, the American College of Sports Medicine on how to do the test and what to do with the test. What I love about it, it's It's a test that can help you immediately. It presents a very accurate functional picture of where you are when you do the test. And what the test does is it measures 3 different systems. So it's a test that at rest measures the function of the muscles, the lungs, and the heart. And then we look at what happens with exercise stress. So when you're exercising and it's getting harder and harder on the bike or on the treadmill, we're measuring what happens to those 3 systems with exercise. So the first study that we did was actually the phase 3 clinical trial of Ampligen. We were at 12 different sites doing cardiopulmonary exercise testing all over the United States. And with 200 patients, we just did a single test several times throughout the study to measure baseline and then to measure progress. And what we found is that half of our patients were moderately to severely impaired, but the other half only had mild impairment or no impairment. And yet every physician who referred patients to the study said these patients were severely impaired. They were all disabled. And so we thought, why in the world is this happening? And if you look at the group VO2, I've separated them into different impairment categories. You'll look at predicted, you can see the patients are well below their predicted values. They range from the highest group, 76% of their predicted values, to the lowest group, 33%. That's really, really low. A healthy sedentary individual should be able to reach 85% of their predicted values, and yet nobody in our study did. So we were wondering, why in the world didn't we capture in this study a very good functional picture for half of our patients? And so we did another study where we did a cardiopulmonary exercise test, and we looked at the recovery time and what the patient said. And what we found is that not a single patient recovered in 24 hours, but 85% of the controls recovered. And the rest of the controls had no symptoms within 2 days. But only 1 patient in the study had recovered without symptoms within 2 days. So this is a pretty significant patient report. Well, if this is what the patients are saying, why is this not reflected in a single cardiopulmonary exercise test? This is the same, the controls are on the top and the patients are on the bottom. But you can see that we asked the question, how did you feel immediately after the exercise test? How did you feel the next day? And then beyond. And if you do an exercise test, at the very end it's hard. It's the most you can do. You exercise as hard as you can and then you stop. So you should feel fatigued, and you'll see that the controls have symptoms immediately. They're fatigued, they have shaky legs, they may have a little bit of instability. But look at the patients. Not only are the patients experiencing symptoms immediately, their patients are getting worse over time and building the farther out from the test that we go, whereas the healthy controls have no symptoms. That was with a single day. We decided to look at what happens if we had a second day test. And this test, let me just remind everybody, this is an 8 to 10 minute test. It doesn't last very long. It's relatively easy for the beginning of the test. It gets a little harder toward the middle, and it's hard at the end. And the second study we published looked at the second day test, first day and the second day, and asked patients how they felt. And what we found was kind of interesting. It reflected what we found in the first study, is that post-exertional malaise, we might be able to use this symptom as a diagnostic hallmark by asking a couple questions. And those questions are, did it take you more than 1 day to recover? And what were the symptoms expressed? And what we found was that fatigue plus 3 additional symptoms in one of these categories of neuroendocrine, immune, pain, or sleep disturbance were good indicators of the diagnosis of the illness. So larger studies need to be done, but there's a whole group of people that really love questionnaires and qualitative research. So I like the objective stuff, but we have a physical therapy professor that loves to look at symptoms, and he's a clinician, and he asks his patients how they feel, and he wants to know what they say. So we let him do that. And actually, as a result of this, I got to tell you, I was a little bit surprised. The P2P report that said basically all the research in MECFS is crap, said that our research was fair in this area. So getting a fair from the P2P, I thought was pretty good. And then I was a little bit disgusted because what got fair is not our objective stuff, but our stupid symptom expression. That's, just my opinion. And I'm sorry, Todd, if you see this video, your work is fantastic. And this is just the difference in the questionnaire. This is what we ask. How did you feel? And we leave it open-ended because we want to know what the symptom says. We don't want to coach them. And then we go through it later. And you can see that the healthy control says they're a little sore and tired, and they take less than a day to recover. How do they feel the next day? They feel great. But our patient does not feel great. And so we developed this test-retest strategy, not just to ask patients, how do you feel when you overdo activity or exercise, but can we objectively measure it? And what we found in our initial preliminary study was that oxygen consumption at peak exercise for our healthy individuals was the same or went up slightly, and for our CFS patients, declined by 20%, 27% at the anaerobic threshold. So you see our controls are reproducing within 2 to 3%, and our patients, the next day, things are falling apart metabolically. And so we followed up with a larger study of 51 patients and 10 controls, and published in the Journal of Physical Therapy on the validity of metabolic and workload measurements for identifying people with chronic fatigue syndrome. And Dr. Peterson largely referred the patients for this study, so thank you, Dr. P. And so while he doesn't take credit for much of this, he's always covertly involved in a lot of these studies. So this is our group. One test and then another test 24 hours later. This is what it looks like. You put a mask on your face, and the mask or the mouthpiece collects the air that you're breathing out. So we have an oxygen analyzer, a carbon dioxide analyzer, and then we're measuring the air that's moving in and out. On the cardiovascular side, you're hooked up to an EKG, so we see every beat of your heart and that it's functioning normally, and then a blood pressure cuff taking your blood pressure. So you get a cardiovascular picture, a pulmonary picture moving the air in and out of the lungs, as well as we know what goes in, the percent of oxygen in room air. So what you're breathing out is what your body is using to produce energy. And here's what we found. There was a significant multivariate effect, and there were 4 contributors to that effect. They were workload at the ventilatory threshold was the strongest contributor, but also oxygen consumption, and then peak workload and oxygen consumption. What this study did was it allowed us to correctly classify 49 out of 51 patients with CFS and 9 out of 10 controls. So while it wasn't exactly the same results that we found with our pilot study, it was very interesting that we were able to classify patients correctly. But we found that one CPET wasn't enough. If you just did one test, it looks like patients are deconditioned. They, just need to exercise a little bit more. But when you bring that second test in, it really shows the differences between groups, and it really helped us to correctly classify our patient groups. And that workload and oxygen consumption were not reproducible. We were really excited because this was sort of the first time we were to objectively characterize and measure this elusive symptom of post-exertional malaise. What do you mean? You take a shower and then you have to take a nap. I mean, that's crazy. Right? Nobody believes you. Come on, get out of bed. You just need to exercise a little bit more. Well, if there's metabolic dysfunction, that's a problem. And what's happening is patients are shifting into anaerobic metabolism early, which means you can't do as much. There is a limiting factor. And what I love about this test is that it tells me what I can tell you or our patients what you can do and what you can't do. And we need much larger studies, but it does have the potential to serve as a biomarker for the illness if we can show this in larger studies. There have been 2 other groups that have replicated our results and have showed that the exercise testing the results on day 2 are not reproducible. So what does this mean? I got good news and I got bad news. Which would you like? All right. The bad news is that you're broken. Yeah. Oh, well, then it's not so bad. The good news is you have 2 energy systems. And one is broken, but the other one works. And so you've got to focus on the one that works. And let me show you how this goes. You have an aerobic energy system, really super efficient. It gives you energy units. They're called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, 30 to 36 glucose molecules, or ATP per glucose molecule. It is dependent on oxygen. You have to be able to use that oxygen to produce that energy, and it produces carbon dioxide. Then there is anaerobic metabolism. Anaerobic metabolism, you only get 2 ATP per glucose molecule, not 36. You don't need oxygen, so that system doesn't have to work for you to use it. But you produce lactic acid, which is a limiting factor for continuing to do energy production. So as exercise intensity increases for healthy individuals, this point occurs when you exercise hard, when it feels hard. You start to sweat, you get short of breath. That's when you're shifting into predominantly more anaerobic metabolism. The problem with CFS-ME is that you're shifting early and shifting multiple times a day and shifting not exercising hard, but taking your shower and emptying the dishwasher and getting dressed and getting to and from the grocery store. And so it's the equivalent of running a sprint. And so if you run 25 sprints, you have to stop and rest. You're worn out. Everybody is worn out because you can only use the anaerobic system for so long before you have to stop and rest. And this is what it looks like. This is a classic graph that we use in exercise physiology to explain this, is that within 30 seconds, largely, you have an immediate energy system that does not require oxygen and a short-term system. But after about 30 seconds, those systems run out. 2 minutes is your ultimate warning track point. All the while, the system in blue, that's your aerobic system. But remember, that one doesn't work. So really what you're left with is where we have the line. You're working in your anaerobic energy system largely. You don't have the benefit of the 36. You're living in the land of 2. So if you're living in the land of 2, it means you have to think about all of your activities and all of your exercise differently because you won't recover. And this is the same is true for athletes. We train our athletes using an anaerobic energy system. Unless they're marathon runners or long-distance cyclists, we train athletes to use the energy system they're using for their sport. So hockey players, hockey's really popular here, are largely trained anaerobically. Strength training, sprint training, interval training. That's how you train an athlete. You train the energy system they're using. And so for you, your sport is now daily activities in your life. And so you have to completely rethink doing long duration activities and shortening your daily tasks into short intervals followed by rest. Rest and recover. Recovery is so important because that energy system is broken. Now you can push and push and push, but you're going to end up with post-exertional malaise and end up flaring up your symptoms. So I'm going to give you an example of a marathon runner that we tested. And normally we don't have a pre-illness test. And so in this case we did. She was a 47-year-old female. And before she got sick, 6 months before she got sick, she had a cardiopulmonary exercise test. And she had a VO2 max of 41.4. Her heart rate was 172, and her ventilation, she was able to move 88 liters of air. She got sick with ME. Came to see us because she needed a disability evaluation. And on her good day, her day 1, her exercise test results dropped from 41 to 23. She just lost 44% of her aerobic energy system. Her heart rate dropped 23%, so she had a cardiovascular impairment compared to baseline. as well as her ability to move air dropped 40%. That was on the good day. Now, what's interesting is that this does not reflect deconditioning. You would expect her aerobic capacity to decline with deconditioning, probably not that much. You wouldn't really expect a blunted heart rate response, though, because when you're deconditioned, you tend to have a higher heart rate response during exercise, not a lowered heart rate response. But here's what happened on day 2, and this is a little picture format. From day 1 to day 2, remember she already dropped 40%. She dropped another 42% in her peak oxygen consumption. And then her oxygen consumption at her anaerobic threshold, that's your ability to sustain work at or below the threshold, dropped 17%. But look what happened in her ability to sustain work. That's the second graph. Day 1, she was able to hit predicted sedentary norms. She could crank out the work, and she knew how to do it because she's a marathon runner. But from the good day to the bad day, there was a 59% drop in her ability to produce work and an 80% drop in her sustainable work capacity. It dropped that much. She is a different person on day 2 than she was on day 1 when she overdid it. She did not recover. So what do you do in this case? How do you prescribe it? She wants to run again. She can't run. She's broken. Her aerobic energy system doesn't work. So what in the world do you do in this situation? This is how she felt after day 2 exercise test. And this is also how athletes feel, right? So, post-exertional malaise is not so uncommon. It's very, very similar to an athlete who just pushes and they're going to win the gold medal and they cross the finish line and collapse. Except they collapse, after they've done the biathlon. And you collapse after you've done a day of running errands. So in ME, the threshold is just lowered. And what I would encourage you to do is avoid the post-exertional response. So Dr. Peterson's done a lot of work and mentioned cytokines and the immune system, and that likely there's an immune response going on. And so if you pound and pound and pound your immune system and it doesn't recover, do you think this is a good thing? If you could prevent giving yourself the flu on a daily basis and you had a choice and you could control your illness and feel better, would you do it? Because that's the choice you have. You have a choice to flare up your symptoms constantly or to take control of your illness, learn to listen to your body, use a heart rate monitor, and when it starts going off, you have this activity biofeedback to tell you when to stop. And this isn't something that I've developed. It's been used in athletes for years. So we do cardiopulmonary exercise testing, and athletes know exactly their heart rate and threshold at which they need to stop. And we use it for cardiac rehab for the same reasons. Monitor telepathy, know their heart rate at their threshold to know how much they can do. Let me give you a success story. And the success story is not getting back out there and running a marathon. The success story is reframing how you think about activities. So before using activity management and heart rate monitoring, this patient had trouble washing the dishes. She had post-exertional malaise after 5 minutes, and she couldn't repeat it again the next day. Driving to see the physician, an appointment that she couldn't avoid, is unavoidable exertion. She had PIM for days to a week. And setting the garden hose and doing any gardening was just impossible. After she started the program, started listening to her body, she could do about 15 minutes without post-exertional malaise of washing the dishes, and then she could repeat it the next day. Now that's what I consider success. So you have to make reasonable goals for yourselves, goals that you can achieve. Like, I want to wash the dishes today. Maybe not every day, but set a reasonable goal. Don't set a goal of, I want to run 5K. You can't do that in a broken energy system. You have to do things that are unavoidable. But if you can rest before and after and plan carefully, you can recover. You can reduce your recovery time from a week for her seeing a physician to 2 days. Setting the garden hose, which used to be impossible, now she lies down before and after she does it, she can get out and do a little bit of gardening. So it just depends on what your priorities are. So heart rate monitoring tools, there are A lot of different heart rate monitors out there. I'm going to talk to you briefly about tips and tricks, and then how do you do it. I recommend a heart rate monitor with a chest strap. I like Polar because they're the most accurate. Now, they have wristwatches and bands and Fitbits and all kinds of different things. What is the best heart rate monitor? It's the one that you will use. So the heart rate monitor that is in your drawer because you are mad at it, because you wore it, and it just is beeping all the time, and you don't want to hear that anymore, that's not going to work. So you have to get to the point where you're ready and willing to use it. And, you know, if a wristwatch is what you can tolerate, then use a wristwatch. That's better than nothing. But just know it may not be as accurate as some of the other tools. You need good contact if you're going to use a chest strap, so I recommend you get electrode gel. And it has to be comfortable. So again, you don't have to wear it all the time, but you have to wear it until you have a good idea of what is putting you over your threshold. And the key here is to tie how you feel to what your heart rate is telling you. And you know, your heart is never wrong. It's never going to lie to you. If you have a higher resting heart rate in the morning, just like an athlete, you've overdone it the day before. That means that's a day you back off. And so log your heart rate in the morning. See what your morning resting heart rate is. If it hasn't recovered, it will let you know. A lot of things can provide interference, microwaves, driving, and so you got to know, is it real? Or, you know, so don't freak out, oh, my heart rate's 175. Well, you can take it. No, your heart rate's not 175, it's just interference. So, you know, before you think you need to call your cardiologist, because your heart rate's going crazy, make sure you just take it manually, double check it, because there are a lot of interferences that can happen. Identify your best time of day. Start monitoring how long does it take your heart rate to recover. When you get it up there a little bit, you're doing activities, the longer it takes for you to recover, that means, you know, if things aren't going so quickly for you, pay attention to that. Give yourself permission to rest. Perceived rating of exertion is a scale that's really, really helpful. It goes from very light to fairly light to somewhat hard. And we talked about that hard. When activities are hard, you're too late. You're done. And so I call this red light, green light. And I highly recommend that you start an activity log where you look at your activities, you say, how hard does this feel for me? And what is your body position? And then do you think you're under or over your threshold? Okay, so the red zone is the it's too late zone. You're crashed with post-exertional malaise. You need to stay out of this zone. It's a rating of perceived exertion of 15. It's somewhat hard. So how many of you here are currently in the red zone? It is hard to be here and sit up. Anybody in the red zone? Okay, we have a few. Right, so largely you've probably been over your thresholds many, many times today. Too long. Yellow zone is the danger zone. It feels fairly light. Anybody in the danger zone, the yellow zone? Caution, this should be your warning zone. Okay, warning, warning, danger. You are going to have post-exertional malaise. So it's not that hard. You can actually figure this out. But what yellow does not mean is go faster. Do more. And the green zone is what you ideally want to do is stay in an area that feels light and easy, so that you're not constantly overdoing it and over your threshold. And then you'll be able to do more with less. And I think I'll wrap it up there.
Anyone have any questions?
Hi, Staci. Thanks so much for your work. I have two questions. One is just if in your research or your clinical practice anywhere you've seen a relation between heart rate and mental activity or other, non-physical activities. Because I use your method with heart rate and it's great for physical stuff, but of course I can sit at the computer for too long. My heart rate's lovely, but it still overdoes it. So do you know if the same process is happening? Do you have any other tricks for monitoring that other than just knowing, okay, 20 minutes is my limit, or just wondering if you come across
Yeah, the heart rate doesn't necessarily correlate to mental exertion, so it's overall physical exertion, but mental exertion can absolutely cause post-exertional malaise. And so what I recommend is that patients be aware of that, and instead of working for maybe 20 minutes, you work in short intervals. Go 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off. or negotiate with yourself, and then pay attention to how you feel, because that's the best indicator. So if it feels hard when you're doing the mental activity, then it's too hard.
Yeah. My question was actually, if you know what's going on, is it still the aerobic system causing the problem there, or is that something we just don't know?
Well, I think there's a lot of research that indicates there's a lack of blood flow to the brain. I think it all ties together, likely, but I don't know that for a fact. So there's multi-system dysfunction, and so what we're seeing a lot of different subsets of cardiovascular blunting and shutdown. So it may well be that in response to exertion, mental exertion, that blood flow to the brain is being reduced.
Okay, great. And the other question was just around POTS or any kind of orthostatic intolerance and using the heart rate monitor, because you're lying down, you're in the 60s, you're all great. Your anaerobic threshold is 106. You stand up, you're in the 90s, and then you start walking and you're already over your anaerobic threshold. So, we can manage the POTS or whatever else as much as possible, but what do you tell patients that have that condition as well?
Well, POTS is challenging, as is, any patient with heart disease that's on a beta blocker that blunts their heart rate, it's not going to give them an accurate response. And so again, that's where you go to that rating of perceived exertion scale. If you don't know what the heart rate at that threshold is, because you don't have a test, you can do two things. You can use the talk test, and the talk test is if you cannot carry on a comfortable conversation, you've exceeded your threshold. And the other one is how hard is it? And instead of ignoring how hard it is, you have to be willing to say, okay, this is too hard, and now I'm in the yellow zone or heading into the red zone and need to stop.
So just to clarify, the POTS, if you're taking a beta blocker, the heart rate monitor reading is going to be off somehow?
Yeah, so if you take a beta blocker, so cardiac rehab in anybody that has heart disease, often patients will be put on beta blockers. And yet, they go through cardiac rehab and we're monitoring them, but we're looking more for any abnormal rhythms in cardiac rehab. But if they're on a beta blocker, it's going to change the heart rate at the threshold by blunting it. It won't elevate normally. Okay. So you can't use the anaerobic threshold heart rate in that population the same as you really can't use it accurately in POTS. So you have to really rely on how you feel.
Thanks very much.
How can you safely increase your exercise tolerance, say from walking 20 minutes a day to walking an hour a day?
Okay, that's a fantastic question. I would say that if you're broken, your energy system is broken, walking is the worst thing you can do for yourself. What you should do instead is do anaerobic exercise, which Dr. Peterson recommends as well, which is using that short-term energy system, because what you want to do is improve your quality of life. You want to learn to have your muscles strong enough so that you do your daily activities more efficiently. And I was just having the same conversation with Dr. Potts, who's an exercise physiologist, that even with athletes, we need to focus on training them for performance, and performance-related fitness is not always the best for health. So it's never good for anyone's health to run a marathon. It's just not good for you. I'm just giving the example. But if the aerobic energy system doesn't work, then walking more is not going to improve your fitness. What walking more will do is shift you into the other energy system and cause an immune flare-up. So what you want to avoid is that constant immune flare-up. So if you have symptoms of post-exertional malaise, instead of walking more, it's what is your functional goal? Instead of having your goal be to walk more, your goal should be to be more fit or to enjoy your life more. Be able to get out of the chair easier. Does that make sense? You have to change the way you completely think about activities and exercise. So I tell my patients, stop walking. If you want to walk because you want to enjoy life, you need to walk the dog. Do it for enjoyment, but no, that's something you're going to pay for because you're in the wrong energy system. It's broken. And exercising in a broken system doesn't make you better, it makes you worse.
Like many other people, my body doesn't give me timely clues as to whether I'm in or out of my comfort zone. It'll tell me later. And so I have tried to wear a heart monitor, which I consider to be pretty inaccurate, but it's a guide. And I've been in touch with the Fortius Clinic in Burnaby, and they've very kindly gotten in touch with your center. I was inquiring about whether or not doing the 2-day exercise test would give me additional information that I may need in order to stay in the right zone. I'm reluctant to do that kind of a test for obvious reasons, the health expense and the physical expense, if it's not going to provide me with some really useful information at the end. I wonder if you've got a comment about that.
Yeah, no, so that's a great question. Should you do the 2-day test or not? And why should you do it or not do it? And that's a conversation that every patient should have with their physician. Do the benefits outweigh the risks? Because the whole idea of the 2-day test is to flare up your symptoms and cause post-exertional malaise and then measure you in that post-exertional state. So the benefit is that you get a heart rate at your anaerobic threshold on the bad day. And what I found is that most patients don't do a very good job of managing. And so using the heart rate on the bad day is really a good idea for pacing activities, but it may not be worth the symptom flare-up that you would experience from the testing. And so, you know, a patient that's moderately to severely impaired really shouldn't be doing a second-day test. If you're already severely impaired on day one, that should be enough for disability, should be enough for daily management. But I will also tell you that every patient that I see thinks their heart rate should be higher than it is. It's always lower than you expect it to be. So, you know, that's something that and I never want a patient to be surprised. The test flares up your symptoms. It may take days, it may take weeks. We're giving you the flu. You're paying us for the pleasure of making you sick. And so you don't need, I'm always concerned. I don't want patients to be unaware of that fact. So you really need to be willing to pay the price to do that. And for research purposes, it's fantastic, and hopefully one day we'll never have to do it again. But until we get to that point, those are the choices you have to make.
One of the recommendations that I've gotten from my internist with regards to exercise is the importance of exercising for recovery and treatment.
I couldn't hear any of that. I've got a huge echo.
Sure. One of the recommendations that I got from my internist with regards to exercise is the importance of exercising based on how much I can do. So my question is, would grading exercising basically increment as much as you can? Have you seen any recovery from that approach? Basically doing exercise a little bit more based on what you can and doing more?
Well, I absolutely recommend anaerobic exercise. I don't recommend aerobic exercise, but the exercise prescription should be developed based on the results of the CPET. So if you have no metabolic dysfunction and you have a normally functioning system, then you should be able to do graded exercise and increase it in an aerobic fashion. If that system is impaired, then the prescription changes to an anaerobic-based prescription. The key questions you need to always ask is, did you recover after the exercise session? How did you feel immediately? And how did you feel the next day? And if you're flaring up your symptoms, you're causing an immune response. You should feel good after you exercise. You shouldn't feel worse. You should feel good the next day. You shouldn't have a flare-up in your symptoms. And if you do, then something's wrong with your program, not with you. Yes? Yeah, absolutely. That's a whole separate talk, but it is essentially stretching and strengthening in very short increments. So it can be as simple as lifting a soup can and doing bicep curls or a curl and press. I recommend functional activities that are restorative. So things like sitting and standing from a chair. Usually I recommend eliminating gravity. So you're doing these exercises lying down, but strengthening the muscles that you use in daily activities. And then, of course, stretching to complement that. And listening to your heart rate monitor and your body to make sure you're not overdoing.
How do you then preserve or improve cardiac fitness?
Well, that's a problem. However, if the energy system is broken, you're not going to get a cardiovascular benefit. But more and more research is showing that anaerobic exercise provides a little bit of a cardiovascular benefit, and little intervals throughout the day are also beneficial to overall fitness.
Do you find that people that are following your program really well, you're saying we're broken, but do you see people actually get better that can now move into the aerobic exercise? And especially in terms of, recovering, coming in and out of the condition. I just wonder that because for me personally, my condition changes a lot with the weather, and I'm able to do like a better walk in the morning compared to like in the winter with the rain, I can't barely walk. But when the summer comes, I'm like, I want to, condition my body, and I don't necessarily feel that. So I'm interested to follow your program to check my heart rate and all that. But I'm listening to my body and I'm seeing the effects, and I'm just wondering if you see that with the people that you work with that are doing the program consistently.
In terms of who responds the best, I think the patients that respond the best, that are able to really engage their aerobic energy system, are those patients that are on Ampligen and antivirals and have this drug boost that is altering whatever is going wrong in the illness. And those are the patients that benefit more. Those are the patients that are back out exercising normally. Now, I've got a case study on our website, and I've seen patients improve dramatically in their exercise test results and their functional abilities, but usually it's by interval, short intervals followed by rest, but not running that mile. But you want to make sure whatever you do is safe, right? That it's restorative, that it doesn't cause post-exertional malaise, and those should be your guides.
Any other questions?
I can certainly send it to Susan and make it available for you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Staci. That was absolutely wonderful and really a great benefit for everyone. We would like to have a little bit of time right at the end of the day for additional questions as things come to your mind.